Did I do it? Yep. Okay. I'm trying to get used to the technology. So, yeah, it's not American University. It's Washington University in St. Louis, but that's okay. I do have a connection to Indiana also because my son's girlfriend is from Indiana. So just to give you a little bit about Interbit Data, we do provide report distribution and business continuity services, and certainly it's one of the things that's given my interest in all of the things about business continuity and backup. We have customers in 49 states in Canada and UK, and actually 22 customers in Kentucky and Indiana. Now, I'll probably reference the fact that I feel old at times, and I can say that I go back to a time when I would talk to customers about the issue of business continuity. And for them, back in the 80s, business continuity meant payroll. Because as long as the hospital could continue to pay their staff, that their business requirements were met. And certainly over time, that allowance of days without computers has shrunk, and computers have become that much more critical. I'll start, if I get my coordination right, start with one of the elephants in the room, which is everybody hearing about cyber attacks. It's although 2020 was probably defined by COVID, the fact is that cyber attacks also continued to rise and actually rise dramatically. In fact, in 2020, that's where you get this number, $21 billion in estimated cost. 92 individual ransomware attacks at about 600 different healthcare sites. And because of reporting requirements, it probably was actually more. It simply points to some of the vulnerabilities and need to strengthen the protection and to look at how the hospital can protect itself. At the same time, we need to highlight the fact that even with a good plan and a good structure, you need to think about what are you going to do, how are you going to continue to care for patients if the system is not available. And that's where I got the title, disaster recovery is not enough, because you need to think about the operations of your facility and the care. Again, this is more, you may know some of these sites that may be nearby, but again, it's sites throughout the US and throughout the world, obviously, have been hit. And in fact, statistically, it's identified that healthcare is the #1 target for ransomware in 2020. Now, why is that? Well, one of the reasons is, amazingly enough, the data that's found in patient records is about 10 times more valuable than simply getting a credit card number or something like that. But also, the uptick in attacks is also reflected to, what's happening with the workforce. And somewhere here on my slide, you see UHS, which probably made the most headlines. UHS is one of the largest healthcare systems. It was hit by ransomware in September. And, they had to shut down all of their systems across the US And it took weeks or about a month before they were able to get back to their previous operations. And that's not to say that there wasn't significant cost. Again, it's dramatic. Again, talking about why healthcare and what's the issue? Well, it's a challenging environment, as we all know. We, on the one hand, we're enforcing security. We're concerned about security. And, we're doing that by, putting together controls and all of that. At the same time that there are mergers and acquisitions, melding of systems, and an extension of the patient care continuum, to encompass a larger geography to take care of the patient. So we're opening up the system to incorporate more people and more things at the same time when we're trying to restrict communication. So it becomes a great challenge. It's doing two things at once. We also have, disparate systems is part of the challenge. And disparate systems which, have legacy content. I mean, there are any number of systems that I've heard about that, the hospital or the healthcare system is maintaining equipment that runs on Windows 7, right? And they need that technology. It's expensive to replace. There may not be upgrades available that are reasonable. And so you're caught between a rock and a hard place. How do you deal with that? At the same time, I mean, you talk about legacy systems having vulnerabilities. Well, the whole influx of IoT devices. IoT devices also have significant vulnerabilities that have been identified. So, the latest technology, you want to extend services out to the patient's location, but there are certain vulnerabilities that are coming in there. Obviously, the complexity, lack of training, and there's a lack of training really related both to how the individual can protect themselves, and what do you do if there is a downtime. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, as I say, exacerbated by this worst of possible coincidence, which, COVID-19, forced people into remote locations, those who could be. It actually was the unexpected benefit was telemedicine, although, again, telemedicine was poised for an explosion and now has exploded, and it probably won't go back. But again, it is a new structure, a new environment, and it's doing that at a time when the workforce is challenged to keep up with everything. Any number of IT departments that I talked to in the past year talked about employee furloughs and all of that, reducing their workforce while more challenges were coming up. And again, we all want to, there's the common lie of, do more with less. The truth is, you can be more efficient, but you always do less with less. I mean, you can, anyway. Just another daunting statistic is, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has a variety of framework suggestions, which are very clear cut and identify steps that should be taken. And a current survey shows that only about 44% of the healthcare community is, is compliant with the standards that have been set out. Healthcare relies on connected technology, right? I talked about how in the 80s, a lot of stuff was done manually. The computer was an assistant. Over time now, and certainly after the billions of dollars spent through Obamacare, more and more is reliant on technology. The EMR, EHR, laboratory systems, e-prescribing, they've all utilized the computer technology and connective technology to both create efficiencies and that error checking validation. Imaging, again, a lot of dense information. Telemedicine, again, it's, a couple of years ago, everybody was talking about, capitated care and how do you manage a large community, a large geography, make sure accessibility and all of that. And so now we do have telemedicine as a real reality, and hopefully that helps us to serve in geographically isolated environments. But again, it's opening up the infrastructure as IoT devices, your blood pressure cuff or all of that. And that is part of the, the new connectivity with telemedicine is not just can I consult with you, but I can do diagnostics where you are and feed them to me. But again, we have to have environments that can accommodate that. The next slide is also sort of alarming. In Germany last year, there was in fact an incident where a hospital was crippled because of a cyber attack and had to transfer a woman from one location to another that had not been attacked. And in fact, she died in transit. And they did essentially attribute that to a to her death being caused by the cyber attack. However, there are more, I have some more statistics coming up about how many, deaths can actually be attributed to downtimes and all of that. There is also beginning to be some case law in terms of, liability associated with not providing clinicians with current information in order to provide care. And if any problems arise because of that, there is some liability that's being shared with the institution. Anyway, there's a quote here from a doctor out in Oregon about, recognizing that, its workload, its downtimes, all of that, is an incredible stress, and it ultimately impacts patient safety and all of that. As I said before, Universal Health Services, had to shut down everything. It's amazing that as we've improved our utilization of technology and we've started to take advantage of the benefits, we also are becoming reliant. And it means, with that strength, it's also creating another risk. So a cyber attack, which can be a variety of events, in Q4, it was estimated that the average ransomware payment was $154,000. Okay, and yeah, this is the study I was thinking of was in 2018. Vanderbilt University suggested more than 2,100 patient deaths, I believe, nationwide, could be attributable to the variety of breaches, and in fact, increase the 30-day mortality for heart attack victims, and obviously impact other types of protocols which are sensitive or reliant on computer technology. The impact on operations is significant. University of Vermont Medical Center was hit by a cyber attack in October. 5,000 devices were crippled. They had 30 days of downtime across all of their systems. And after a month, they said that they were about 70% recovered, but were losing $1.5 million a day in lost revenue and expenses related to recovery. So there are significant financial ramifications. There are insurance premiums, and it's wonderful, the advent of cybersecurity and as well as other things. But as I just did a renewal on my cyber insurance, and the questions this year compared to the questions last year, far more exhaustive and detailed requirements, wanting to know much more about our firewalls, our defense posture, how we allow people in or out. It was they're getting a lot more sophisticated, and obviously the premiums are going to reflect that. So that's going up. The potential to impact revenue because of patient satisfaction or rumor and innuendo and all of that, and regulatory fines, and obviously not the least is the whole issue of patient safety that is challenged by these areas. So as I said, we've been providing some solutions to facilitate access to information in case of downtimes for a long time. We always looked at a sort of continuum of planned downtimes. You can advise people to be prepared. You can allow them to get some information together so that they have it, and you're saying it's going to be 2 hours and all of that. And then they're unplanned. Well, one of the unplanned is the 2 hours becomes 6 hours. Okay, so there's a greater gap to that understanding. There's also all kinds of network outages, power outages, all of these things that you have to recognize. It's not just system-wide, but if a wing of the hospital or even just one floor, a cable gets cut or whatever, they are essentially without their system. How do you deal with those types of downtimes? And then there's the disaster, which again, hopefully you have some preparation for, but you need to think about how are we going to be in a stance for this. And a lot of times what we've done is, we're doing backups and, hot sites and all of that different stuff. Now comes along cybercrime, okay? And as efficient or practical as some of our other solutions were, cybercrime becomes something different because it's all well and good if I have a redundant storage network, but if the PC on my desk becomes a paperweight because of a ransomware attack, it really does me no good. And if you understand that a cyber attack frequently happens days or weeks before it's released. I mean, the actual infection occurs and grows over time before it actually triggers. Then you understand even your backups have to be examined very closely before you bring them up, or else you're going to promulgate the same problems that you have. So the continuum has changed, but we need to always think about that that challenge of what do we do when the system's unavailable. And we recently had a webinar with a panel of nurses to talk about downtime. Nurses at this point are spending, they're certainly the largest segment of your workforce, and they spend about a third of their time inside the EHR. And, it's really significant, the chaos that can be caused by downtimes. Now, certainly, again, one of the wonderful things, wonderful innovations over the last probably 10 years is electronic medication administration. I mean, that has helped to reduce medication errors, whether it's the wrong medication, whether it's the wrong dosage, all of those things, but it's entirely reliant on the interactive, interaction between the patient, the nurse, and the system. And once the system's removed, okay, so you have to figure out how to replicate that. And the other challenge is these workflows that have been developed. You understand that when you change the tried and true workflow, you open yourself up to more mistakes because it's something that people are not used to. Let alone the fact that many of the workforce in the hospital, the new nurses, they've never really worked with a manual system. My wife is an instructor at a couple of university nursing systems, and amazingly enough, she's working with the new classes of nurses, both bachelor's and master's degree, all the time. They don't really get any time to spend in the EHR. So it's interesting. So all of that happens at the hospital, and it's hard to accommodate everything. So here are some other interesting statistics. So a 2019 study by Applied Clinical Informatics found, in a downtime, lab results could be delayed an average of 62%. So 62% longer to receive lab reports. And in fact, frequently, the ordering patterns of the clinicians don't really change during the downtime, and that creates a tremendous logjam within the lab department in order to even process all of that things. And we are a connected universe, and how everybody is communicating with each other is very much reliant on the background systems that should be in place and may in fact be compromised. Okay, so I'm now getting a warning that I'm taking too long. So typically hospitals respond, paper printouts. Actually, if you Google hospital downtime, you'll find that A lot of the things in Google are, what are you supposed to print out? And printing is slow. It's difficult to circulate. It's hard to find the information. I'm looking for John Smith. Redundancies and backups, I've already mentioned, that they are part of the auditing process, that you need to have that, but really it's so that you preserve that information and that you don't lose patient information. It does not address the operational side. And even the cloud system, which relieves you of problems that the computer room gets flooded, but not the cloud, it still is not really addressing itself to your end users and your operational processes. So other problems, yeah, there's a lot of money involved. Certainly, there is potential for long-term, short-term financial impact. So what are the best practices? And again, I don't mean to shorten this, but obviously, as I say, the historical planning for downtimes needs to be modified or enhanced in order to accommodate the cybersecurity challenges. The number one thing to do, or the number one important thing, is that a lot of, if not most, attacks and successful attacks center around people, right? So it's your users who, whether it's compromised credentials or inappropriate access or whatever, it's really your users that may be compromised. And so you need to spend time in training them and, as I say, trying to instill a sense of paranoia. And I'll give a quick story that a month ago or so, I received an email that said it was from a reporter from CNN. So I figured, why in the world would somebody from CNN be contacting me? I thought that was a phishing, trying to get me to do something, and that it was really a wrong email. So I looked up the person on Google, and sure enough, there was a whole profile of somebody from CNN. And so my next logical thought was, I sent a message back to them and I said, I think your email's been hacked, because why in the world would you want to talk to me? And I got an email back saying, I actually am trying to talk to you. And when I actually got her on the phone, she said, are you always this paranoid? And yeah, I mean, you have to be. Those are the kinds of things. They've gotten so sophisticated. An email comes from Microsoft something or other, and it's not Microsoft.com or .net or something that you might expect. It's a phishing thing. You need to be examining these things, and you need to instill that training and hopefully even testing on your users. Microsoft estimates that multi-factor authentication can block 99% of automated attacks, and it's a relatively low obstacle for you to bring, and it provides a lot of reward. Again, just in the interest of time, you basically need to look at what you're doing. You need to implement systems that will learn, patterns and things like that. They need to be intelligent, because the miscreants continue to come up with new tools. So you need to instill paranoia. You need to make sure that you are training your users and even testing them. You need to look at where you are vulnerable and estimate your risk. And everybody wants to think, you're challenged to say, what's the return on investment? It's risk avoidance. It's not, it doesn't have an ROI. I mean, the thing about healthcare is, unlike other industries that you can do insurance investigations, but really one mistake may in fact be too much. So you want to really, you really want to protect yourself against the incident to an extent that makes sense. So think pragmatically, think of high return, low cost, like multi-factor authentication. You got to hold your vendors responsible also, that they need to be securing their environment or providing you with mechanisms to ensure that you're protected within their environment. You need to do the training. You need to beef up diligence, make sure that you're looking at things, and you have to create plans and you have to test them. I mean, because that's, again, the plan that's on paper, in business, they used to do 5-year plans every year, which reflected how much they were even looked at. But you need to actually put those plans in place and then take the time to test them, because it's your people who are going to be going to make sure that you are protected. Yeah, and obviously you need to think about not just protecting yourself, not just correcting it, but what are you going to be doing during that attack? What can you do to ensure your operations continues to operate? Yeah. With that, I'm going to open up for any questions that may have come up. I hope I'm educating everybody. I see Ethel there.
Yes, thanks, Arthur. Took me a minute. Oh, yep. There was one, and there's your alarm. All right. So again, if you have other questions, you can drop them either in the room chat or in the Q&A, and I'll leave my reading glasses on so I can read them. Again, thanks for those great insights. A couple questions here. One of the things you talked about are all those IoT devices with patients. Yep. So how do hospitals protect patient data when sometimes patients aren't protecting their own data?
Well, yeah, but they're not liable, and you are, which is just the gotcha. I mean, basically, you can provide advice to them. If you're going to receive data in insecure channels, you need to isolate that data that you get, so that it doesn't impact the rest of your environment. So, it's not to say that you can't open up to those IoT devices, but just isolate it. I mean, my firewall has, 20 different DMZs I could use that would isolate from, I can still look at stuff, but hopefully it will stop any attack from going further down the network. And you've got to take a defensive posture and give them advice. But as we all know, it's not always taken. Yeah.
So with that, there are tons of new things coming on the market all the time. Healthcare systems want to be really innovative, but there seems to be a disconnect between being innovative but then being protective. So how can people stay up to date without putting themselves into a vulnerable position?
Well, if you talk to any of your security professionals, you will note, as I say, paranoia, because it's not a matter of what would happen. It's a matter of thinking about what could happen. And that's where the two aspects. One is the intelligence of our defense systems to adapt. So they can see a pattern in a message as opposed to the literal message. And they can see that pattern looks a lot like a fishing expedition. So I'm going to flag that one, even though I've never been told about it before. So that's the intelligent defense systems. But then the other side is, it's as important to be looking at what attack vectors have hit you. Even if it hasn't been successful, to recognize what's being attempted, because that's going to help you to build your defense posture that much more. So I think that answers.
Yeah. Another question from someone here. How do you address remote devices and telehealth, both visual and data exchange?
Again, I'll tell you somewhat anecdotally, we use a particular vendor's firewall, and they have a VPN client, and their VPN client does an antivirus check on the machine that it's on before it will allow it to connect to our environment. So it's things like that, again, the extra step, so that I am enforcing my policy and procedures on the people who want to connect to me. And it's not an onerous process, but it's a thought out process.
So one of the things you talked a lot about was staff training.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed, is there any thinking behind planned downtimes? Because I know a lot of systems, always do their planned downtimes at like 3 a.m. when the least amount of people will be affected. However, then when there's an unplanned downtime at 8 a.m., your 3 a.m. staff is all gone. And they're the ones who know how to deal with the downtime.
And you're advancing one of the challenges. So do I want to mess everything up by doing an exercise while everybody's going to be affected? But the answer, unfortunately, is yes. I mean, because, maybe it's better to test it out and to see, but you need to make people familiar with the environment. And in fact, I can't remember if it was anecdotal or if it was a statistic I read, but that when some of the nurses were notified of a planned downtime, they took the day off because they didn't want to deal with it. And as I said, I can't remember if it was anecdotal or if there was some statistic, but it did ring true. So you gotta, people need to be familiar with it, and they don't need to be beaten over the head, but it needs to be simple, easy, and it needs to be repeated on a regular basis, because unfortunately we're so busy that the half-life of familiarity, you got to look at it probably at least twice a year.
So one of the things you mentioned were about the new standards, and that only 44% were compliant with the latest standards. So what did we do to move the other 66%?
Well, it starts by examining what you're currently doing, recognizing that it's human nature to say, what I can't do anything about, I'm going to deny exists, So, yes, cyber attacks are overall relatively infrequent. So I'm going to pretend they don't exist, except that, in the past 5 years, I think it was about 60% of healthcare environments have been hit by some sort of a cyber attack or breach. So most of the experts will say it's not if, but it's when. And so then you have to think of, you obviously have to think about the cost of doing this, but the cost of doing nothing is very expensive. So you need to move that into a priority, and you need to look at the risk. Admittedly, cyber, well, it's more than insurance, but it is something that preserves your environment. And to be attacked, and there are so many places that said it's unlikely and then got attacked. You know, it's you got to do it. You know, as with any communication, you need to look at what is the evidence that will be persuasive for the people who make decisions. Is it quantitative, talking about risks? Is it qualitative, talking about the patient safety risks? There's a whole lot of data out there, so you can create a persuasive argument for that investment, and it's a matter of, you know, building on the investment that you have.
With that, I have time for one last quick question here. You know, there's a big push for interoperability. Do you think that at all makes systems more vulnerable to attacks?
The way that we're doing it certainly does, because you know, fire notwithstanding, there really is not a standard. You know, it's you know, the interoperability is more frequently than not different at one site than another, and you know, the lack of standardization means the possibility of error and missed pieces and all of that. And you know, I do another talk about interoperability, and it's a whole interesting thing. But the other thing I'll leave you with in terms of interoperability is that there's interoperability in terms of a unified electronic health record. But then there's sort of the operational interoperability, which means I got to get Dr. Smith these results, you know, and we need to always be paying attention to both things. I think, you know, ultimately we can come with that unified EHR, but the practice of getting information to and from people is still maybe outside that box. So it presents its own challenges.
Right. Well, Arthur, again, I want to thank you for sharing with us today. Thanks for everyone who was able to join this session. I want to remind you that the next sessions start at 3, but the coffee break is open, always between sessions, for you to connect with participants and sponsors. We'd love for you to join us there. There is also a great panel on telehealth today at 4 o'clock, and I know they're giving away a lot of prizes, so we hope to see you there as well. So again, thank you, Arthur. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone, and feel free to contact me if I can be of assistance. Thank you.
Thanks for joining our spring conference, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you for having us. Yep. Bye-bye.